Hello, 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 hello. My name is Robert McGilliff-Faldrake. I am the founder of Talent Summit and CCO of Sigma Recruitment, part of Group Adequate. Warm regards from here in a drizzly Dublin. I hope you're all well. We have a large pool of HR leaders from across the globe, in fact. We have a heavy concentration across mainland Europe, from the States, and indeed here in Ireland. We've over 700 HR leaders on this. And again, for those of you who haven't engaged with us before in relation to Talent Summit, we set it up 10 years ago. And really our enduring purpose from day one was to enhance the working lives of people as the world of work changes. And by God, has it changed in recent weeks. We last convened in Dublin about 6 weeks ago from yesterday, I believe, beginning of March. And I'm reminded of a quote that Aidan McCullen from Flow Group shared with us when he pinched a quote from Lenin, where he said, there are weeks where nothing happens, and there are decades where nothing happens, and then there are weeks where decades seem to happen. And it certainly seems like that in recent weeks. In the 10 years we've been running Talent Summit, we have never seen so much change to the world of work. And we said we would bring some of our former speakers and special guests back to base camp to explore and to help navigate some of these challenges, and also to look at some practical ways of enhancing the working lives of our people. And we said we'd take a look through three separate lenses at this point. So one, how can we as a senior HR leadership community help provide business continuity in the short term? Secondly, how can we position our organizations over the coming weeks to drive competitive advantage, ultimately to position our companies for market growth as the markets look to recover? But fundamentally, and most importantly in the long term, how do we enhance the working lives of our people? So really, really delighted to be joined today by two of our guest speakers. So we've hand-selected two of those from based here in Ireland, but with international remit. First of all, I'd like to welcome John Reardon, who is chairman of Shopify International and heads up the support function. John leads the largest fully distributed remote workforce in a support organization in Europe, supporting over 1 million customers across the globe. John, you're welcome from County Cork.
Hey, Robert. Very nice to get the invitation back, and looking forward to contributing.
We'll see how we get on, whether you come back again or not. Thanks, John. Stephanie, welcome. So Stephanie Weiss, as a lot of you may know, is the Global VP for People at eBay. And Stephanie, she leads a team of over 100 HR professionals across the globe, between headquarters in California, across a lot of the support shared service centers across a couple of countries in Asia, Berlin, Salt Lake City, Dublin. And again, is at an interesting stage in development. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thanks, Robert. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on today. Looking forward to the next hour or so.
Yeah, for sure. So guys, I encourage everyone just to ask questions. You'll see the tab at the bottom to add questions, and we look to deal with those over the next wee while. This is the first in the 6-part series. And again, if you just click and follow the button at the top beside Sigma Recruitment, it will give you the notifications for the next 5 parts in this series. The theme today, really want to look at a look beyond where we are right now in terms of us being really harpooned into the remote working world in recent weeks. And I think there's some fascinating learnings. I think there's a degree of residue that has come with that. But ultimately, I'd like to see and explore what we've learned over the last number of weeks, and how do we apply that learning right now to improve productivity, to improve the working lives of our people over the uncertainty over the next couple of weeks. And then ultimately, how do we look to reconnect? So how do we look to reconnect the remote workforce in a physically restricted workplace. What does that mean? What can we do to ensure collaboration? What does it mean from a leadership perspective? And look to navigate the next phase of connecting our workforce. So, John, I might come to you to begin with, if I may. So, you've been somewhat of a pioneer, John, in terms of promoting, building, leading the largest distributed, fully pure play remote workforce in Europe, perhaps. But it mustn't have always been like that. When did it start, and what were the initial challenges you faced, John, when you went about that?
Well, I'm going to go back a little bit in time, because you did mention the word pioneer, so you're implying that I'm older than you. So thank you for reminding me. But it was about 2002 when I first got involved with remote work, when I was working in the US. And it was post 9/11, and I was worked with Virgin Atlantic Airways, and we needed a radical change to the cost structure. And one of the things that we looked to implement was to bring in a lower cost base. And one of the ways to do that was to go with an outsourced provider that was based at home. So that was my first experience with remote work, and I spent probably the first year looking under the hood to see where was the catch, because it couldn't be this good or this easy, and I couldn't really find the catch. So then you'd kind of question yourself and say, that's 2003, 2004. How come it hasn't mainstreamed between then and now? And that's the meta question here. How come it hasn't? And I think the best way to describe it is there's so many infrastructural challenges, and there's so many big plays that companies have made that provide those, I'd probably best refer to them as institutional antibodies against a full flow of this work. So on one hand, you have a lot of people who have laptops and mobile phones provided by their company, and the company is encouraging them to use those two devices in their home work environment. This is, for the last 15 years. So by one frame of reference, you could refer to those people as being knowledge workers or remote workers, because the company is encouraging them to work remote. Yet, is the company enabling and empowering them to work fully remote? The answer is no. And we have to look at the why. And one of the biggest why is, I'm afraid I don't know how to do it, and I'm afraid I'm going to lose some element of control. So between sort of my early days in kind of 2003-04 doing this and 2010, it grew at a snail's pace. And we kind of went to bed on about 12th of March 2020, and we woke up in 2030. It really happened overnight, almost all across the world, depending on which country. It was kind of a couple of weeks apart.
You look well, John.
Rip Van Winkle. So it really changed enormously. And, to the point you raised earlier on, it's a forced function. This is not by design. So the true question is, how are we going to change now? Because the genie is out of the bottle completely. And there are aspects, and it's probably one of the things we'll tease out, there are aspects that will never be able to be put back in the bottle. And it's the companies that adopt the best things and adapt in the best way are the companies that are going to significantly survive.
That's well said. And interestingly, so we do a survey every year, John, right? So we do it with EY. So we poll, it's the largest kind of HR leadership poll in the country. So we measured the pulse. And the one thing we've been tracking was the remote workforce over the last number of years. And this year, so this was in peace times, this was back beginning of March, like before that night when we were forced to transition. But it had changed from 2019 to being 20% of the workforce, which I think is a very generous number, by the way. But those who work remote in some capacity, whether it be in a shared environment or work from home, and it moved from 20% to 25%. So it grew by 5% year on year, and literally overnight it's gone to like 90% globally. So again, it's something that has been forced. Stephanie, I'll come to you if I may. So at eBay, you guys have, and you've always had a significant portion of your workforce here in Ireland, at least, working remotely. What benefits have you seen if you compare and contrast that, say, in peace times to the physically present workforce?
Yeah, we started probably around 2 years ago, particularly with our CS organization, to really target a remote workforce. And we found, particularly in Ireland, that's worked really well. We've got people working in every county in Ireland that have never stepped in the foot of an eBay building. We recruit, onboard, train them all remotely, and it's worked really well. But I would like to call it, like, I don't think this is the same as that, right? And we were parachuted into the situation that we're in right now. I mean, we're very thoughtful and planningful in terms of the workers that we have, that we had permanently working remotely. This situation forced us to push all of our workforce remotely, to work remotely, into an environment which isn't a usual work environment. And I think that's like, this will absolutely change how we work going forward. But I suppose my big call out is that people working from home today aren't working from home in a typical environment. They're faced with, they've got to do their day job, and they're faced with being a caregiver to family or friends, a home school teacher, right? So they've got additional stress and factors on top of them that we've not experienced before. And take all of those out of the way, and I think there's a ton of learnings that we can take from this situation, and it will completely change how we think about work in the future.
Love it. And John, so you starting and being fully remote, so this has been your world for a number of years. I just see some questions here from somebody at Dropbox, just asking about anxiety, about isolation. Have you experienced any of that, and what have your the biggest challenges been for you as a remote leader in recent years?
I think there's two ways to approach that. I'll approach it from a corporate perspective and give you an answer, kind of a Shopify answer, and then I'll give you a very personal answer. When you're managing a fully remote or fully work from home team, you have to embrace and understand the feelings that people have of isolation and loneliness. To pretend that it's not the case is actually shooting yourself completely in the foot. The concept of actually having having someone to talk to is a very important thing. And yes, you can actually spend a lot of time on Zoom calls and Hangouts and Teams and all the other stuff. But there's an aspect, we are humans, and we are built to communicate with each other. And there's only a certain amount of kind of clearly resonant communications that we can have through the medium of video. So you're always going to have some, I suppose, some aspects of loneliness. So dealing with it right up front. I'll give you what we do in Shopify. We actually talk about loneliness and mental health on day one, right? We have a checkpoint the whole way through our onboarding process. And it's probably no different from what Stephanie and her team do. It's a constant. You talk about it every week, every team meeting, and it's really a case of how are people feeling, because you have to have that pulse, and you have to be able to move really, really quickly if something happens. So, for example, one of the things that we do, which I think it's worthwhile sharing, is that we actually have a team of coaches, not performance coaches, but actual personal coaches, and their job is to provide a level of support if you ask. That's their role. They're not a from a call center perspective, they're not helping you with your average handle time or any of your, let's call it your basic functions. It's a coach for the top 4 inches. And that's a really important thing. That recognizes that people are, when they're at home, there's a lot of stuff going on upstairs that you need to be aware of. From a personal perspective, as a leader, it's a challenge, and there's an aspect of it where you have to lead from the front. And I'll just be very vulnerable. 2 weeks ago, I think it was Thursday, 2 weeks ago, which is about the 15th, I think it was. Wednesday or Thursday, I was having a really poor day, and I knew from a trigger perspective that here I am out there projecting a very positive viewpoint, and I'm kind of the face of it, and I've got this happy smiley face, and I was actually crumbling a little bit internally, and I actually pressed the pause button, and I just sent a note out to my team and said, look, I'm taking tomorrow off because I need to practice, and the term I use, I need to practice some self-care. The importance of that message was huge, because it said it's okay for somebody in a senior leadership role to have a shitty day. It's okay. It actually is okay. And I went for a walk, walked the dog, read books, bounced around on the trampoline, walked the dog again. I mean, that's what I did for the day. And I came back on the following day and I was a whole lot better able to contribute. And I think it's a very important thing that as a leader, that you don't just profess the what I call sometimes the leadership crap that we have to deal with it from time to time, but we actually live it. And when you have those crappy days, really, really crappy day, you put your hand up and go, I had to take some time off. It's okay.
An empty light or an empty lantern provides no light, John, when it comes to self-care. And that's actually something, I think you've touched on something like that's very real to a lot of people. And I think people on this session will identify with that. Like, people are having real kind of highs and lows, I think it's fair to say. And again, like, if you trust upon obviously the external crisis that's happening, a lot of the trauma, a lot of the stress, the anxiety, like on top of that, like I think it's a very real experience. And like, it's very interesting, very honest of you, John, number one, but B, in terms of leadership, like our intent, so we've 727 people here, for example, right? So our intent as leaders, like, is not how we will be measured or not how we will be judged, like post-pandemic or post-crisis. It's ultimately the experience of people in our presence. And if that experience is negative, or if we're not having the desired impact on people, well, that's how our leadership will be remembered. And I think, to be honest and come from a place of vulnerability, it nearly gives you you're doubling down on people assuming positive intent when you speak frankly, because you've demonstrated that. I think it's a very powerful thing, and very honest of you as well, John, by the way, to share that. Stephanie, the experience that you guys are going through around the world, when you look at the mobilization, say in China, for example, when you mobilized and everyone went into lockdown, and then in Europe and then in the US, what has stuck out for you, for the leadership team at eBay, in terms of the competency or the muscle that has developed most over that period, and what surprised you most over that period?
Yeah, I might just talk a little bit from my own perspective as well on this one. Like, I feel like we were thrown into crisis, right? And it took a lot for us all to really grasp the situation, what was going on, and how we were going to deal with it. And I say that from my own perspective, but that was the same for every leader across the organization. And really what we had to figure out is, like, how do you make this work for myself, but more importantly, how do I make it work for my team? And I would say, like, what's shone out from a competency perspective in terms of our leaders is just the level of empathy, flexibility, and agility that they've shown. And we are fortunate, I suppose, that we're in a business that continues to see a lot of activity because of the pandemic has pushed a lot of people, I suppose, to shop online. So we were dealing with personal crisis, with business crisis around how can I trust that I'll get what I need to get from a workforce that's going to be working remotely? What about all these new problems that are in my team's way? How can I help with them? And we were faced with that, and also faced with, how do we support our buyers? How do we support our community in a safe way? And how do we ensure that we keep the channel open? And what I found is, like, people just got behind it, and they focused on the purpose, and they jumped on it, right? Because I suppose from an eBay perspective, we are a very purpose-driven organization. That's, we power economies for individuals and small businesses around the world. And that's what really got our employees moving, and that's what got our employees motivated. And despite the challenges that they had, they just got on with it, right? And I think that in terms of your question, what's shown out from a leadership perspective is leaders' ability to, like, meet employees where they're at, empathize with them, offer more flexibility than I've ever seen us offer, and still drive really, really strong outcomes.
And can I ask the flip side? That is a very interesting observation. And I think the human element, and again, like, humanity in work was the theme of our conference a couple of weeks ago, never been more relevant. And I think this seems to be the silver lining for a lot of people, and something we need to protect in many ways as we look to kind of go mainstream again in kind of workforce planning. In terms of values, you touch on your enduring purpose, Stephanie. In terms of your values in the organization, was there any of those values stressed or under threat, or like would you view what you stand for as a business as being quite different now as a result?
No, I think if anything, it just brought it all to the forefront. It's our values that have really shown out. It's our culture that's really shown out in terms of like our business, our platform is built on relationships. It's built on people. It's built on trust, and that's what we fell back on, and that's what we did. We trusted our people. We trusted our buyers, our sellers, and I think if anything, as I said, I'd say it's shown out even more. And was even more prevalent.
Nice. Thanks, Stephanie. John, in terms of managing, like I know both your sector in general, so e-commerce is obviously on a very strong upward trajectory, and there's a lot of obviously the home shopping happening around the world. I know you guys are having a great performance on both sides. But in terms of productivity, in terms of managing productivity, like hasn't one of the barriers to remote working historically been obviously the culture of presenteeism, recognizing the input and not the output? But how are you managing productivity, or how do you do that in a workforce of whatever 100 people you have across Ireland?
First of all, it's a lot more than 100, but we'll let that one go. The multiple hundreds.
Exactly. No, exactly. Yeah.
Show up. I think. Sorry. It was mentioned actually in the chat a couple of minutes ago. I think was it Billy Butler mentioned it, the word trust. The single most important thing that underpins everything is trust, and we've found that by trusting our people, I mean, because it's just a value that we bring into it. It's just stepping on the shoulders of what Stephanie just said about those values are actually kind of best tested in a crisis situation, and when they stand up, then it really resonates well with your workforce. So for us, it's about the way in which we trust our team, and trust is the actual inverse of presenteeism culture. It really is. We don't care. We I wouldn't say we don't care whether people show up or not, but we trust you're given a job, you're given a series of outcomes that we're looking for, and we trust that you will deliver those outcomes best. And what we found, and it's probably similar to what Stephanie's alluding to as well, is that in a needs must situation, which we've all been in for the last couple of weeks, when employees know that what underpins our values is trust, and they come with a request for an accommodation, and that request for the accommodation may well be because, oh God, I now have 3 kids under the age of 5 running around, and I have to. And we recognize that. Our merchants recognize that. Everybody recognizes that you have to come to an accommodation. And if your starting point is, I trust this employee to do the best job, and they're coming to me with the best accommodation that works for all of us, then it becomes an incredibly easy thing. But if we had gone into this, and I'm sure Stephanie would agree with this, if we had gone into this awful time over the last 6 or 8 weeks without that bedrock of trust, to try to build it now is actually probably one of the most dangerous things that we could have done. So we were both lucky, I think, that we actually had that as an underpinning value. I mean, if you look at, and I'm sure Stephanie would agree, there's 3 or 4 things that we've been incredibly lucky, both companies. We're in a space that's kind of hot right now. Yeah. We've got a lot of volume coming our way, and we have a deep level of trust, both from from you, the buyers and sellers, from us, our merchants and our employees. I would shudder to think how difficult it would be if you had to create that environment from scratch over the last 6 weeks. So my focus on being present today and in any other events is in some way to share what we've done, but I also recognize we're in a very, very lucky position in that we've been doing it for quite a while. So to do this, it's not really a ready mix thing where you kind of add water and sprinkle something else in and it miraculously appears. It's kind of miraculously appeared because of 10 years of hard work.
And you mentioned the word connection, John, and the word connection, and you rightly call out that your sector is on an upward trajectory, and again, like you're in normal peace times pretty much, and you can measure the output against what's been achieved previously. And I think one of the challenges for a lot of people is right now is the the output has fallen away or stopped. Their business has pretty much come to a standstill. So again, trying to grasp or trying to kind of understand the inputs of what's required from an action point of view to deliver any output is now different. So the context has changed so much. So I think I know and I get what's involved in terms of building a bedrock of trust and to have relationships that can deal and be stressed with any kind of time of crisis, never mind what we're going through right now. But I'm curious to know if either of you have any kind of view or any insights into like how do we give enough space and to ensure that our people fill it with productive activity. Well, not like, where's the balance between having some data-driven kind of insights to help kind of navigate through uncharted waters, and where do we give the space? So do you have any sense of the balance of freedom and responsibility? Stephanie?
Yeah, and just so I'm clear, like in terms of people's day-to-day and outcomes are driving for you. Yeah. Look, I think just to touch on a couple of things we've been talking about there. I mean, I had lots of conversations at the beginning of this with leaders who were really worried about people working from home. There's lots of leaders, understandably, because it's how all of their career have worked, that if they can see the white of your eye, they know what you're working on and they believe in it, right? And they've got to have their team in front of them. And when they've got something like a crisis going on in a normal business sense, the first thing they do is pull all their team into a room and they figure out how to do it, right? So we've had lots of conversations with leaders at the beginning of this that were really worried about how they could remain productive, how they could stay connected. And the reality is, I don't think it's a data-driven question or answer. There is no formula. We were thrown into it, right? And we had to figure it out. And I think straight off the bat, what we realized was that connection was really important and that we couldn't rely on the conversations around the water cooler. And we were going to have to figure out, what rhythms we had with what rhythms teams had and how they needed to increase the frequency. And now we're at a situation like a couple of weeks in where people are saying, okay, enough Zoom. I'm spending too much time on meetings, don't have enough time to get my work done. But I still think what we did up front in terms of putting those additional routines in place were really important. But now we need to take a step back and people need to have a bit more space. So I don't know if obviously it's not a very data-driven answer that I've given you, but I don't think it's a very data-driven problem. Like, we're trying to figure it out and we have to learn and adapt as we go. But in terms of outcomes, I think we as an organization have always been fairly flexible with employees. We're very clear on what needs to be done and when it needs to be done, and that's what you check in on, right?
Yeah, for sure. So talk about checking in, John. So in terms of, like, again, you really helped us at Sigmar short circuit a lot of learnings when we kind of mobilized and dislocated our workforce to go mobile a couple of weeks back. And I clearly remember you talking about over communication. So from a comms perspective and collaboration perspective amongst your work, your colleagues, the hundreds that you have, any tips or insights that you could share to sustain that? I think it became exciting and different for a period. Zoom technology, all the different ways of communicating. And as Stephanie says, like, people just become a little bit up to here with it. You know what I mean? And it takes up so much of our time. Can you help us short circuit this a bit more, John?
Yeah, this one, when Stephanie was saying it, I was laughing because there's an absolutely delicious irony in all of this. So, and you remember from the conversation I had with you and your team, Robert, we talked about the importance of, like I said, over communication and both say it in a meeting in Zoom and then also follow it up with some documentation. So, if that the classic maxim, if it wasn't written, it wasn't said, and all that kind of stuff. Throughout all of this, one of the things that we've reinforced at Shopify, and it's kind of a forced function that we have internally in the company, which is really good, and it's kind of a weird one for some companies, is we have a philosophy of no meeting Wednesday.
Oh,
so there's a clear. So when you think of it, imagine a world where there are no meetings on Wednesday, no Zoom, no meetings, nothing. So my calendar is jam-packed Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Wednesday is where you actually get to work. Now, of course, what happens is people start sneaking things in. But one of the things that we reinforced really early on in the last I can't even remember the time, the last 5 or 6 weeks, was don't forget about no meetings Wednesday, because that's the time when you get to get the work done, because after all, the work needs to get done.
Yeah.
Right. And, we're judged on our work product, not our hair product, which you can see for me would be a bust anyway. But that's what people want. People pay us for our work product, not do I look good and am I doing a wonderful job in person? No, it's the work product. So for us, we focused on this, and we actually free people's time up. Apologies, Alexa's talking to me here in the background, telling me that somebody at the front door. Yeah, so it's really important that that I turn off my notifications. So I'll shut up now and mute. This is the vagaries of working live and remote.
This is live showbiz. John. Thanks for that, John. It's definitely. I spoke to a CPO of in a global Irish business yesterday, and maybe on this call, and was intrigued to know about onboarding leaders in remote working scenarios. And I think the same person. So at Sigmar, we've recently hired a director into the business in recent weeks, but we had the luxury of spending maybe 3 months with him and get to know him, and he met all the team before he onboarded. I read in your quarterly report earlier today that you've just appointed a new CEO, global CEO for eBay. Do you have any insights you can share with us in terms of onboarding leaders, and what are you doing at eBay to support that?
Yeah, you should probably ask us that in a couple of weeks, and we'll tell you. I'm sure we'll have plenty of feedback on if we were successful. Yeah, look, we're actively hiring. We've got hundreds of open roles across the board. I think onboarding is one area that we're challenged with. I remember when this when COVID-19 first raised its head, we quickly enough stopped on-site interviews, and at that stage we were wondering, how could we possibly interview people? We weren't bringing them on board anymore. And within a week of that, we stopped working in offices, so went to full virtual interviewing fairly quickly. So we've been adapting to that over the last couple of months. Given that we've got a high volume of recruitment to do, it's been really challenging, right? We have a number of things that the team have adapted to really quickly. We're doing some virtual career fairs over the next couple of weeks to help people really get a sense of what it's like to work in eBay. So what I asked the team to do is to put together a career fair that makes people feel like they stepped inside the door of one of our buildings and get a really, really good sense of it. That's difficult to do, and but the team are behind it, and they've put some really good content and material together on that. So reason why I call that out, I think it's the challenge that you're calling out in a virtual world happens before the person even steps inside the door, right? We've got to connect with them and connect with their hearts and heads to have them really consider eBay as the right employer for them. But we've onboarded hundreds of people over the last 2 months, and we've done that remotely. I think the biggest challenge that we have, we can bring people up to speed. We've experienced training people that work at home remotely, so we can bring them up to speed in their job. I think the biggest challenge is culture, right? And how do you really give somebody a sense of culture over a screen, and who the organization is and how we do things around here. So we've been, I think we've done a ton of work in that space. We're using lots of material that we would normally use with new hires when they come in a normal environment. And I would say at this point, we're evaluating how successful that's going to be, right? But same as our other points in terms of connectivity, we're doing more than we would normally do, and we're just overemphasizing on communicating and not assuming people will just pick it up, because we're not just going to pick it up naturally, right? So all the things that we'd like people to know about us and about how we operate here, we're just overemphasizing in terms of sharing it. And right at the top of the house, as you mentioned, we've got our new CEO joined on Monday. He's stepped right into it with our earnings yesterday, and he's going to meet all our employees today over a global all hands. So it's a challenge for us to help bring him up to speed, but I'm sure it's challenging for him too in this environment, right?
No, for sure, for sure. And interesting, you mentioned culture, and you mentioned like trying to bring the organization to life in terms of what makes you attractive. Again, what we have noted, and again, I might bring my colleague in shortly, Sean, to give some insights, is that it hasn't become an employer's market. Like top talent is still busy being successful and still needs to be engaged. And if I look at your enduring purpose around kind of powering economies for individuals, that's very powerful. And it's interesting around the type of work that's valued increasingly in recent weeks, and it's those who are impacting communities in which we exist are the ones really being shone out and called out as being the superheroes. So not just healthcare, but shop workers and like work across the board. It's not your fund manager who is the champion of who keeps society up and running. It's those in the front line. It's those keeping the national infrastructure running. And I saw a piece of content today from Glenn Dimplex, and it was a really velvet rich kind of piece of, it was a video piece around the real kind of the impact that their product range has on people's lives. And it really just kind of hit a switch with me and kind of played to their heritage. And it was a piece of content I've never seen from the organization, and I thought it was a really kind of nice play, and the tone was really kind of pitch perfect as well. And it just was something that was like a lean-in moment. And I've seen a lot of that come out in recent weeks. John, just on the recruitment side, any insights, tips you can share with us in terms of onboarding, assessing virtually, and how do you do it?
We're in a very interesting situation in that there's almost two separate companies within Shopify. There's a support organization of 2,000 people around the world that are fully remote, and then there's the rest of the organization, which is an office-based culture. So you've got those sort of a collision of two cultures. So what actually happened was the fully remote organization, sort of nothing happened. We just continued doing our job. The other 3,500 people suddenly, and I'm say this with a touch of irony and a smile on my face, there's a new shiny toy. There's this thing, we're going to move home, and oh my God, we're going to build a remote work remotely, and how will I fix my monitor and my screen and the lighting and all that? And there's 2,000 of us over to the side kind of going, oh, newbies. Yep. Newbies, right? So there's a certain aspect of that which was kind of interesting. And I think what actually happened very quickly was each got used to each other, and suddenly you had 5,500, 6,000 people working remotely. And what actually happened was the organization, the support org, which would fully onboard and recruit, onboard, performance manage, and essentially, and also leave people go from a remote perspective, is suddenly working with an organization that's very much, that has that whole function in person. So what the two end up leaning in together. So what we're now doing is all of our employees who are onboarding, because we're continuing to hire, come in through essentially the support onboarding functionality, which has always been remote. So we were able to lean in and help each other. And that's an enormous, and again, when I say we're privileged and lucky, and I know a lot of people on the call wouldn't have that luxury of that level of experience, but we were able to put, I suppose, the support machinery at the avail of the rest of the organization to dip into. So that's sort of the learnings that we've had, is that there was a symbiotic relationship between the two parts of the org.
Interesting, really, really interesting, John. I'm going to zoom my colleague in, Sean. So Sean O'Shea heads up our European Centre of Excellence. So he's a team of about 60 recruiters, and they've done a big body of research in recent weeks for the hardest to find tech talent from right across Europe. So we'll have some interesting kind of insights to share in terms of what we're seeing. Hi, Sean.
Hey, Rob. How you doing? Hey, everyone.
Good. You're in Tralee.
Yeah, I just realized a bright red t-shirt with a green background and a blue set of glasses. You can see I'm not used to working remote. I feel like a pack of Skittles at the moment, so apologies to everyone.
You like one of the newbies that John described.
First day on the job, all excited, so apologies. Yeah, you can dim the contrast. Apologies for that. Anyway, I'll know for next time.
Sean, what are you seeing in the marketplace from the candidate side, and what is changing by the day?
Yeah, I suppose, look, the candidates we're dealing with are obviously tech-focused candidates, so they're slightly more insulated in the rest of the market, and quite privileged, as in the nature of their role, I suppose, is a lot more remote able. So this isn't really a whole new world to them, probably similar to John in terms of their environment is already there, okay? However, what they're not insulated against is the noise in the market, okay? So what we're probably seeing is there are probably three big shifts, one being motivation for change, second one being engagement, and third one then actually being the whole interview process when it comes to recruitment. So what I mean about they're not insulated from the noise is in, like, tech talent is surrounded by people, unfortunately, who are losing their jobs. So be it friends, be it co-workers in other departments, be it loved ones. So it is creating uncertainty in the market. And anyone who's ever worked in tech recruitment or anyone who's ever hired tech has known that for the last few years, they've been this untouchable gods. You know, they've had the pick of absolutely everything. However, we looked at data from last year, and the number one motivation for changing jobs for tech-focused people was 6% of it was only job security. So only 6% of people only changed jobs who were technology staff for job security. And this is looking at tech-centric locations such as Dublin, Stockholm, Amsterdam, Berlin. And that was because if a company failed, it was fine. They were going to get another job. It was never nearly an issue. It was nearly like a badge of honor. Yeah, I've worked in a tech startup that's failed. I know how to help you avoid this, okay? However, what we're seeing on the news and again through friends, social media, is that there's suddenly a panic in the market that's never been there before. So like we looked at data from the last 8 weeks, and 24% are now looking to change jobs because of job security. And it's not necessarily their job security, but we're getting tasked with questions that we're now asking our clients that would never be on the radar of an average level engineer, okay? So they're not just looking at the funding of the companies. They're going really in depth into what series of funding are they in. So it's not just, do they have VC backing? It's who are these VCs that are backing them? So then we can check out the track record. And we're used to seeing this at senior director level, C-level type positions. But now we're on about every single member that's probably looking, every member of the staff force is now thinking, how secure is it? And that's not just say, oh no, this is only impacting startups or hyper growth companies, because now it's the multinationals also that are probably being impacted, because suddenly people want to see if their company is not involved in medtech or e-commerce, they're in difficult times at the moment, or they could be facing difficult times. So the questions they're asking is, well, what is their strategy? What is the plan? And because things have hit us really quickly, I don't know if every company can actually answer that. So it's not just even thinking about trying to capture culture, it's suddenly trying to capture a strategy that was never before on people's radar. Then, like, where it flips on the other side is engagement. So I've for years have spoken about the fight for talent, or like probably best to put it, the fight for talent's attention. And suddenly we're in this world of where you have your opportunity to speak to talent. So never before in our life have we ever had, unfortunately or fortunately, depending which side you sit on, unrivaled attention to speak to somebody. So our stats show that usually it takes around 5 days for an outreach to speak with talent. And that could be because their diaries are busy, because look, people are obviously working, then in their downtime they're commuting, or they want to go to the pub, they want to do football, they want to do something. That's all gone. So it's people's new lives, it's this bubble, and they're sitting at the laptop. Their phones are all on loud. So how many times have my team would have rang somebody, and there's probably many managers on the phone that can recognize somebody's whispering walking out into the corridor. They're probably speaking to a member of my team, so that's what tends to happen. Not any clients though, to be clear. Okay, so that's what tends to actually happen. But now people are responding. So our response rates have gone from 5 days down to 24 hours. And the knock-on effect then is actually in the whole recruitment process. So most companies will talk about their time to hire, and the magic number is usually 27 days. And probably everyone's going to laugh about that. It's impossible to get to 27 days, okay? But that's the number. And most tech recruitment revolves around the technical test. So you're asking somebody, can you do this technical test? And people have lives, people have family, social lives to gain. So it takes them around 5 days. Now that's taking max 48 hours. Even the basis of setting up an interview, because everybody, like we've talked about the old traditional stereotypes, I need to see the white in their eyes, I need to go meet them. So then that's 4 or 5 days that someone has to think of an excuse how to get out of work so they can go meet somebody. And then like your 27 days is really turned into 32 days. So we looked at one of our clients and they had a 28-day onboard hire process last year. We've just finished our one recruitment process and it was 7 days. And that was 7 days, and that was 3 technical stages. From the minute that the CV landing in the hiring manager's inbox to the offer, and the offer was accepted on the spot, it was 7 days. So they're the kind of 3 big changes I think that we're seeing in terms of the candidate side anyway.
Very good. Sean, I'll zoom you out, and thanks for that insight, and continued success with it. Johnny, is that what you experience in normal times in terms of remote recruitment? Is the process short-circuited because it's virtual? And can you pull talent from across the globe? Is your competition, is it local? Is it globally local?
Well, it's kind of sort of a loaded question because, for example, for the entity that exists here in Ireland, we hire within the borders of Ireland, so
Okay.
it is global, right? It's as in, being typically Irish, all of
Yeah.
Ireland, so globally local, right? So and you can live anywhere in Ireland, but so you have to be very careful from a legal entity perspective. You can't have, there might be free movement of labor around Europe, but there's not free movement of legal entities. So you got to be very, very careful about that. One of the things that I would note is that I think what we'll see from a trend perspective over the course of the next 6 months is people will start referencing in interviews what they did and how they survived this time period, and it will be a seminal moment in people's careers, and people will be forever putting forward the fact that they are an employee who's adept at remote. So to use the word you used earlier on, remotable, that's going to become something that people really, really focus in on. And I'll be again very honest. If anybody call me regarding a job, the conversation is usually over in within the first 30 seconds, because I'll ask, is it, can I work remote? And if the answer is no, it's like, sorry, and it doesn't. After that, it doesn't really matter. So I do think it's going to, like, what we see is it does that the overall, go back and actually answer the question that you actually asked me rather than giving you a party political broadcast. The recruitment process for a remote hire, particularly at the lower level, can be really, really quick. Once you recognize that the person's got the skill set, once you have somebody meet them and you actually have a call, be it on Zoom or Hangouts or whatever, and you actually engage with somebody, pretty much that it's the right person. Quick bit of background checking and off you go. And once you have an experienced recruitment team that know those things, they don't have to elongate the process. They really don't. So the answer is clearly yes, you can foreshorten the recruitment process.
Well said. Well said. Okay, guys, I'd like to bring it into a different gear now again. So again, we've examined some of the practical do's and don'ts and some of the things that may short circuit our competitive advantage through the remote lens. But I want to look and moving on now to kind of the next phase in terms of reconnecting the workforce. I've heard a lot of people talk about never let a good crisis go to waste. And using that in the context of kind of quicker decisions to let people go typically. I would argue that we as a HR community should never let a good recovery go to waste. And as we look to reconnect our dislocated workforce into the new norm, whatever that might be, like, how do we enrich the connections with our people? And it's probably fair to say that people have been affected, and you touched on this at the beginning, John, in very different ways, and their experiences are very human. And I was actually struck by this yesterday. So my wife was having, she was under the weather a little bit yesterday, right? And my middle daughter, Robin, disappeared, right? And she came out with this. So I don't know if you can see that, right? So this is a thing that she did in the bathroom next to my office here, right? And I'll read it to you. It says, 100 kisses, Mamay, Mamay, from Robin. I was quite touched by that yesterday, and it really showed me that a simple act of kindness, like what it means, like really what it means, and it's very fresh in my memory. And if I look at what we can do in terms of this being our potential time to reconnect with our workforce, I think the old analogy from sport, person first, player second, is probably the way to play this. Mm-hmm. And if we look at the human connection first, and that's coming from a place of perhaps gratitude, empathy, as you mentioned, Stephanie, and really connecting on a human basis first, and then employees second, I think it will have significant impact on the connectivity and how rich the connections are as we look to figure out the next phase. Stephanie, you probably have a bit of a kind of a head start on most of us in terms of getting workers back into the workplace. So it's likely we are to face a physically restricted workplace over the coming kind of weeks, possibly months. I spoke to Matt Moan, a workplace expert earlier on in FKM, and he spoke about like the risk of Legionnaire's disease because water hasn't been running. Spoke about the physically distancing, and he's seen about 50% kind of restriction in most workplaces, but also around like air conditioning, the quality of the air conditioning, and things that I wasn't even aware of, that we need to actively consider. How did you guys go about reconnecting that workforce in Asia, and what are you seeing play out across the business right now?
Yeah, we've been, I suppose, because of our population in Asia, we've been a couple of steps ahead of this for our larger markets in terms of US and Europe, and same applies in terms of getting back to work. But what I'll say, like, so our workforce in Asia, we've got. I had a call actually yesterday morning, and I got a lot of the team on from APAC, and we still had probably 50% of the people that are on the call were still working from home. Somebody from Korea, they pretty much almost back to normal staffing levels and normality from a country perspective too. And then I got like folks on from Singapore and Shanghai, and they were sitting in the office with masks on, right?
Yeah.
So actually, the reason why I call that out is because I jumped on the call yesterday, and I was like, this is a completely different picture than I've ever seen before, right? I had people at home, I had people like sitting in a room with masks on, I had two people sitting in one room at opposite ends. So, like it's a different environment, and it's a different view. But in terms of our response and getting people back into the workplace, I would say that first and foremost, as we're getting folks out of the workplace, we stayed really tight to government recommendations and what we needed to do. But I think what I would call out as like the biggest learning from it that we'll deploy everywhere else is that, yeah, it's great to get people back, but it's also, we got to make sure we do it on their time and their terms too. This has been like a extremely anxious period, as I called out, for people already.
Yeah.
And we've got some workplaces that are open where we've got employees who themselves personally just don't feel like they're fit or ready to get back into the office, right? They don't feel it's safe for them, and for whatever personal reason they might have kids that are still at home, and the schools aren't back open, right? So I'd say like a biggest learning is like from a business continuity perspective, we looked at what are the key jobs and where do we need to get people back into the office, and where could we be more flexible, and we opened that up to employees. And again, I suppose like I think as an organization, like we tend to be really inclusive in terms of how we do things, regardless. But again, on this, we're even more so inclusive, and really try to get a sense and a pulse for how employees are feeling, and just not push it. The reality is, like, if you're not in industries like the ones that myself and John are in, we've proved that you don't need to be in the office to do a good job. So don't push people and put extra pressure on them to get them back in, And it helps. Sorry, just one last thing. It helps too with some of the additional requirements around spacing and things like that, And
how did you choose who to bring back?
Yeah, we looked at it from a business continuity perspective. So what jobs are most critical to the business, and particularly some of the tech jobs, it makes the person's job a lot easier to be back on site. One of the kind of more interesting things that we're hearing from some of our European employees at the moment, as we start to talk about returning, and everyone wants to talk about returning, particularly our employees in Spain and Italy. A lot of them have been locked inside their apartments for the past like 6-7 weeks, and they're actually saying, "Can we come back?" So we're, rather than us driving that, they're trying to drive it, which is fine. Like we're open to that, and we'll figure it out with them. But people want to get out of their apartments, get out of their houses too, right? So I think, like as I said it kind of early on in terms of leadership, empathy and flexibility, the two big takeaways from this.
Nice. Thanks, Steph. John, what have you observed in terms of what we've gained and what have we benefited from in the last number of weeks that we should look to protect in terms of the shift to remote working as we look to return? So from an individual perspective for our people, for society, and for the company?
Well, I think the first thing that we've recognized is a respect for working from home that didn't exist before. Okay, many of us who've worked from home for a good period of time will remember or will have heard the term shirking from home instead of working from home, which, and oh yeah, your golf game must have improved now that you work from home and all that kind of stuff. And I think what people are realizing, and it's shown up in all of the studies over the last couple of weeks, that people who are working from home for the first time are experiencing what all of us have experienced over time, which is the self-regulation. How do you actually stop working? So it's the problem is at the other end of the day. It's not foreshortening the day, it's elongating the day. And that's where the challenge is. So I think so the first thing is there's a healthy respect that didn't exist beforehand. And, some of the kind of, let's call it the smart ass snide remarks are now have stopped completely. And I think there's a really strong undercurrent of mutual respect, that it's a skill in and to itself. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, and I think it'll be interesting to see if this comes up in some of the surveys that Sean does over time, or he picks it up, is remote as a skill will be something that people will talk about. And I think we should probably even take a look at LinkedIn and look to see how people use the term remote 6 months' time versus now. And I think it'll be a cataclysmic change in the way in which people use the term remote. The third aspect is the home workspace. I think what we'll see is 2020 will be the year that the home workspace has become professionalized. And the companies who are in that space doing the, let's call it the relatively cheap standing desks, like I have one, monitors, a bunch of other kind of accoutrements that you have in your home office. Those companies are absolutely exploding, and it's now quite conceivable to really pimp out your home office in a way that really looks nice for a good, decent price. So there's a massive professionalization of that, and you look through any of the statistics on e-commerce sales, and it's things that enhance people's home work experience are things that are selling like hotcakes right now. So they to me would be what I would call the three biggest observations.
Just pick up on one of your observations, John. So we have been tracking a cohort of talent who were set up to work remote for the past 18 months, in fact, because again, we were servicing the Berlin market predominantly. But more recently, we're looking at those who are remote but mobile ready. This is the next iteration of that as the workforce looks to kind of, again, get reconnect in the workplace. A question for both of you, and probably my last question, just push for time a little bit. In terms of managing, Steph, come to you first. Like the challenges and opportunities of managing a new blended workforce. So if we are restricted by about 50% in returning the workforce to the workplace over the coming weeks and months, where are the challenges and where are the opportunities to get the balance right? Because one would assume that those who are present and closest to the management will be seen, more visible, might get more opportunity, will get the information quicker. Are we into like a two-tier kind of track over the coming weeks and months? And where are the opportunities and where are the challenges within that? And what's your overall view on that?
Yeah, I think what you've described is probably going to be a reality for many of us over the next couple of months, in terms of we'll have a blended workforce. And who knows how that's going to change over the next, further on the horizon, in terms of, and we didn't even get a chance to get into that today, right, in terms of employers' overall view on remote working and where that brings us in terms of the future of work. But look, I think what you're calling out is going to be a reality. But the fact is, I think what will be really helpful for us in this situation is that we've all lived it now. Our leaders have lived it. They know what it's like to manage people remotely. They know what it's like to sit at home and work in a remote environment. They felt that isolation themselves. And I think that will help them through it. But just to be on a more practical level, I think what is really important for us is that we are really clear with people on our expectations from them in terms of their work output and what we expect them to be delivering, and I don't, you know, be balanced in terms of those in the office and those at home, and we'll figure it out like we figured out everything else over the past 2 or 3 months.
Can I just jump in on that one? I think to every organization that will have people working from home and also people working in an office will always have that challenge and that issue as to, do I get more favorable treatment than somebody else? If anybody thinks there's a magic potion that's going to eliminate that, it's not going to happen. And I think that's the creative tension that HR professionals need to both recognize and utilize. I mean, because there's a positive to it as well as being a negative. And if you let it become a negative and let it really damage an organization, then it's happening on your watch. If you're able to recognize it and get in front of it and communicate about it and communicate and basically ameliorate some of those concerns, then you're doing your job really, really, really well.
Well said, John. Well said. And isn't it amazing, guys, what we've witnessed over the recent weeks around what we can do? Like, again, like to move into kind of action orientation, and what we've gone through and what we've achieved has been phenomenal. And it'll be really interesting to look back in years to come to look at the speed that we've kind of mobilized and the impact we've had in terms of the longer term kind of competitive advantage of our organizations and what that means then to the working lives of our people. John, Stephanie, thank you so much both for joining us, and thanks for sharing your honest insights. It's been really, really helpful and very, very impactful. And I wish both of you continued success in your endeavors, personally, professionally, and I wish you good health in the interim, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. So to you viewers back in your home offices, it seems, we're going to share a working hub, so a working from home hub, to kind of capture a lot of the content we've discussed around some insights into how we look to mobilize back to the workplace as restrictions lift, and then some practical kind of insights and kind of toolkits for employees as they work from home to drive productivity. So we'll share that next week. The HR leadership have been in the front line around these people-centered decisions over the last number of weeks. And I know a lot of it hasn't been easy, but what we do next and what we do over the coming weeks is ultimately what will define the next decade for us and our organizations. I wish each of you best of luck with that. And if we can kind of remember the human first, employee second, that would be my one takeaway from this hour. And please tune in next week, where we have renowned author and TED speaker and entrepreneur Margaret Heffernan, author of Uncharted. She's going to speak about uncharted leadership. A phenomenal guest. Please tune in. In the interim, good health to you all, and good luck on enhancing the working lives of your people. Tune in next week. We'll talk then. Thanks a mil. Cheers, guys.